Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear teachers, students, and researchers. On behalf of the organizing committee, I welcome you to the last session of the seminar, Digital Health in Teacher Training, a Gender and Interdisciplinary Approach. In the previous sessions, over the last 2 weeks, Spanish colleagues have made relevant contribution to these seminars in the areas of research, teaching, and practice in a broad range of topics such as fitness on social media, social challenges, activism, critical visual literacy on the body, artistic and creative participatory methods in digital health. It is a pleasure for me to have the opportunity today to present an interdisciplinary panel of experts on the topic of digital health and digital literacies. We are having the opportunity to collaborate together through a seed funding Una Europa project specifically focused on how to provide physical education teachers with the critical knowledge on digital health. We have an exciting session today that will allow us to exchange ideas and reflect upon key problems and challenges that young people face when they navigate the complex landscape of digital technologies focused on healthy lifestyles. We are going to have 2 main conferences with Emma Rich from the University of Bath and Antonio Maturo from the University of Bologna. And then we will have a recess for 15 minutes, and then we will start an exciting panel discussion about digital health and how to promote gender equity in schools in this area. Finally, but not least, I would like to thank the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Gonzalo Jover, for being here today, supporting these and other actions that situate our faculty and the University Complutense of Madrid in this exciting new area of research. And finally, I would like to thank also to our supporters, the Minister of Equity, the Spanish Minister of Equity, which is funding these 3 seminars. And now, Gonzalo Jover, please, you can open our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Jose. So good afternoon and welcome to this seminar. I will follow now in Spanish. Quiero realmente felicitar a las personas que han organizado esta actividad formativa sobre la salud digital en la formación de los profesores, porque a mí me parece que es de una rabiosa actualidad. Nos guste o no nos guste, el mundo digital se ha instalado en nuestras vidas cotidianas, y una buena prueba es esto que estamos haciendo en este momento. Yo, de hecho, tengo que confesarles que me he incorporado casi al límite del tiempo, porque estaba prácticamente seguro que esta sesión era aquí al lado, en nuestra sala de conferencias, hasta que de repente me he dado cuenta que no, que era en otro espacio, distinto. El mundo digital, como todo en la vida, pues tiene evidentemente, es una especie de realidad bifronte, ¿no? Y hay que estar muy preparados realmente para ella, y sobre todo en entornos de formación como en nuestra facultad. Pensemos, por ejemplo, en temas de salud, ahora mismo en la posibilidad de monitorizar una operación online, que sencillamente era impensable hace tiempo. Vale, bien, pensemos en eso, pero pensemos también en otro tema que toca mucho con este seminario, que es el ciberbullying en las escuelas. Pensemos también en la capacidad de usar la información de manera muy inmediata. Hoy se habla mucho de la Open Science. Bien, eso está bien, pero pensemos también en la realidad de la fake news. Es decir, es un mundo realmente que tenemos que analizar muy bien, porque tiene esta doble perspectiva. Es un mundo también muy basado, y he visto en el programa que esto se tratará a lo largo de estas sesiones, un mundo muy basado en las imágenes. Es verdad, se utiliza mucho más la imagen que los largos textos escritos, eso está también a la orden del día. Nosotros solemos decir que una imagen enseña más que 1000 palabras. Y es verdad, si esto es verdad que una imagen enseña más que 1000 palabras, también es verdad su contrario. Es decir, que una imagen miente más que 1000 palabras. Hay que tener muchísimo cuidado también con todo este tipo de mensajes. Así que, como les digo, pues bienvenidos, bienvenidas, y enhorabuena a los organizadores por plantear esta actividad.
Gracias, Gonzalo. Before beginning with the first part of our session, I would like to thank also and introduce Noemi Avila. She's part of the organizing committee. She's a teacher and researcher at the Faculty of Education too in my department. And I really appreciate your support very much. And I would like to say thank you just here in this public forum. And also I would like to thank you, Shirley Gray from the University of Edinburgh. She's also part of the organizing committee and she is in charge of organizing the panel discussion with the rest of our colleagues. Let's begin with the first conference today. Emma Rich, thank you very much, Emma, for being here. Emma Rich is professor at the Department for Health at the University of Bath in United Kingdom, where she's the director of the Physical Culture, Sport and Health Research Group. Her research focuses on critical pedagogies on health and physical activity, advancing theoretical frameworks to understand how people learn about health and their bodies, and the impact this has on their identities, health practices, and physical activity. Her work has contributed significantly to the fields of sociology of health, critical weight studies, health studies, sociology of education, and pedagogies. She has authored an incredible amount of relevant publications on topics including digital health technologies, obesity policy and politics, eating disorders and education and the body. So I think she has a very broad expertise on the area of education and critical pedagogies. And recently, she has led an international research collaboration funded by the Wellcome Trust. Her project, I think, it's being very, very relevant for all the researchers who are beginning with their research in the area of digital health and young people. Her work was entitled "The Digital Health Generation: The Impact of Health Lifestyle Technologies on Young People's Learning, Identities, and Health Practices." And I think that this work made a key relevant milestone for all this area of knowledge. I would like to say thank you again to Emma Rich. I know she's very busy just right now and she's doing a relevant effort just to be today with us. Her lecture is entitled "There is no finish, there is never a finish, you need to keep going, gender self-tracking and digital health technologies." I think this is going to be a very, very relevant presentation, and then we will have the opportunity to ask questions and serve discussions around this topic. Thank you, Emma, very much.
Thank you, Maria Jose, for such a generous introduction there. I will just share my screen before I start. Okay, well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for the invitation to be part of this very exciting event today, particularly to Maria Jose, Naomi, Shirley for organising the event, and I'm really looking forward to both hearing the other presentation today, but particularly the panel discussion and learning from others in this event today, and hopefully having some fruitful discussion about how we might tackle some of the challenges I think that are highly relevant to this digital culture that young people are incredibly immersed in. And a particular thank you to your Dean and the University of Madrid and to all those involved in organising an event. I think it's very challenging to do these things online, and it seems that things are running pretty smoothly so far, so let's hope it continues throughout the afternoon. So, as Maria Jose has indicated, the title of my talk is around gender and self-tracking and digital health technologies. And that in and of itself is a vast topic. So I'm going to speak to what I think are some of the particular challenges, but also opportunities that are presenting themselves through these new environments. A little bit of information on the first slide there. If you would like to contact me about any of the research that I'm presenting today, you can do so through Twitter, or there's my website, or through the more traditional email. So a little bit about me. This is my my background. So I'm based at the University of Bath in the Department for Health. And I suppose my research interests really overlap between sociology and health, but also education. So I'm primarily interested in how people learn about health and the social sites in which different agents contribute to the meanings around health, but also the policies and practices. So much of what I do is underpinned by understanding social structures, new social sites of learning, and what that means for how we're thinking about our bodies, but also health. My background is in sociology of physical education. My very early work was very focused actually around gender, eating disorders, and the role of education within that, which had, up until very recently, eating disorders had been very focused around psychology, around the individual. And I think schools and their cultures can present environments which can be very challenging for young people in terms of managing their bodies. Around 2008, I started getting very interested in hearing about how young people were learning through the internet. And of course, back then we used the term cyberspace, websites, and the digital environment now is very different, much more immersive and unfolding at a rapid pace. But I was very interested then in how that space was becoming medicalized. So this was a book that I wrote with Andy Meir back around 2008. Since then, I've tried to bring those research fields together to understand the learning that takes place in digital environments around health. So it's been really exciting for me to be part of this seed funding project, work with such great colleagues, and try and understand the implications this has on teachers, and how we might train teachers to be better equipped for some of these very challenging environments. So in terms of what I'll talk through today, some of it will be theoretical and explain the perspective that I come and what those theories might offer us as both scholars, but also how we might take that forward into policy and practice. But what I want to begin with is by saying a little bit about what I think are the challenging cultures around weight stigma and this term body disaffection. And for me, that's a whole spectrum of issues that we routinely experience in our daily lives, from just feeling a little bit concerned about what we eat and weight gain, through to more severe, more psychiatric conditions and severe disaffection of eating disorders such as anorexia and bulimia. But the cultures in which those conditions are sort of are on the increase. I'll then say a little bit about young people and digital health. Then I'd like to talk about girls and this era of post-feminism that girls are growing up in, and I suppose the tensions around that. And of course, Maria Jose and colleagues have written about this elsewhere. So I'd certainly encourage, if you're interested in that, to go and read some of her work. And specifically then I want to talk about what I see as the risks and opportunities of tracking. And I'll say a bit more about what that includes, because it's also social media. It's not just pedometers or health trackers. We're talking here about the way in which people track what they're doing in social media and interactive spaces, and then just flag some of the issues that perhaps we might follow up on in the panel discussion later on today. Okay, so I just wanted to bring up this headline, because I think discussing these issues today is so relevant because of what we've all been experiencing over the last 18 months. And there's been I guess, a really rapid rise in the number of digital technologies that have been approved during the coronavirus epidemic. And in particular, whilst on the one hand, we've heard concerns about weight gain during things like lockdown, it's also led to some fears around people's bodies, exercise patterns, and we've seen a surge, certainly in the UK, but in other countries too, in the number of people coming forward with troubled relationships with their bodies and food as a result of this historical moment that we're in which people have started to worry more about their weight and turned to digital environments either for support or for ways in which they might be physically active. And I think we probably all know that during this period, we've seen a significant surge in the number of people using digital technologies in their homes, whether those are fitness apps, YouTube videos, or subscription technologies. And this has raised a number of questions about what young people are learning, what's safe, and how they might be curators of that material as well. So young people actually streaming their own health content or sharing with others what they see as safe or legitimate forms of health knowledge. We've seen the increase in celebrities during this time, telling us what physical education might look like. So those of you that might be familiar with the case of Joe Wicks in the UK, who was a kind of fitness celebrity, who was then deemed to be the nation's PE teacher during lockdown. There was some backlash to this. And of course, this is really relevant to the work that we're doing in our seed funding project, but many people are arguing that, well, actually, this isn't physical education. This is a good example of fitness, but education, physical education is somewhat different and encompasses a lot more than simply getting young people doing fitness related activities. So during this period, we've seen a significant rise in technologies and apps being used, but it's also a really interesting moment to revisit what we understand to be physical education and sort of national level and international level debates about what that ought to look like and what we might have learnt during this period. So I want to draw on two projects today to share some of the findings of the research that I've been doing over the last few years, which I think really connect with some of the challenges that are emerging in this environment. So the first is a project that involved actually trying to challenge some of these really difficult environments that young people are finding themselves in, which led to the development of this resource, which is available online if you're interested in this, but it was about developing body positive schools. And part of that was looking at what we might need to do in terms of digital and media literacy. And that involves some workshops with young people. I'll say a little bit more about that shortly, but it was a project that I worked with a PhD student here in the UK and in collaboration with the national charity Anorexia and Bulimia Care. The second project is, as Maria Jose referred to, is the Digital Health Generation Project, which was funded by the Wellcome Trust, looking at young people's experiences of digital health technologies, what they used, why, and what the impact was. So I'll start with this notion of weight stigma and body disaffection, which I think has certainly circulated, been around for many years, but I think that there's research now which indicates this is heightened, certainly during the pandemic, and is highly relevant to the work that we're doing here around digital health technologies. But firstly, what do we know about what's happening in schools already? Well, internationally, I think we know that there are various campaigns which are described as media literacy, which have been rolled out in schools, particularly in the global north, all with good intentions of enhancing young people's literacy and reducing their vulnerability to what we might describe as distorted and negative media images of the body. But there's now a sort of strong critique of these, that they don't go far enough. So some interesting work by Wright and Leahy that claim that this is these media literacy programs rely on a kind of psychological view and individual change. And what that really means is that we put a lot of burden on the individual child to be resilient to those media messages, almost asking of them to opt out of being swayed by them or resisting them. And the critique here is that this is a very individualized notion of media literacy that within education has taken us so far, but we perhaps need to go further now in challenging those cultures which impact on body image and eating disorders. So part of what I was interested in doing in addressing that was something a bit different with young people. So this was a study that I conducted here in the UK with girls aged 12 to 13. This was the category in which the research indicates that those pervasive messages, particularly within social media, are really starting to impact and take effect on young women. And the aim of this study was really to introduce them to a different way of thinking and knowing about fatness and health, ways which didn't privilege dominant biomedical knowledge of what I've referred to and others elsewhere as obesity discourse. So this idea that weight is an indication of someone's health, that thin is good and fat is bad. And actually the science behind that is incredibly complex, and we need to help young people understand that weight is complex, and much more so than the analogy that we typically see, which is the body is a machine, calories in and energy expended. So I introduced them to something called fat pedagogy, which was really about developing a more advanced notion of media literacy. But before doing that, I was very interested to understand their perceptions of health, understand what they felt was important to them in terms of health knowledge, and understand the kind of social context in which they were growing up in. And part of that method was to use drawings to get them to really unpack that. And I've put one on the slide here, but this was typically the type of drawing that we see these young girls producing. So it was very much rehearsing this Western narrative of having to achieve so much and getting this balance right. So be optimistic but realistic, not underweight but not overweight, varied diet, be happy, don't be overweight. An incredible amount of pressure on them to live up to these body ideals. And this quote here, I think, really captures that in terms of pointing towards the significance of relationships and institutions and family life, all these things which come to impact on well-being. But ultimately, that young people, the burdens that are placed on them is a kind of very individualized logic. And we refer to this elsewhere in the literature as healthism, this idea that it's not about social structure, it's not about constraint, that if you simply try hard enough, you can be healthy. And that's incredibly problematic. And we see this played out in the digital arena in a really enhanced way, which I'll get to shortly. So there are those challenges around weight and stigma and disaffection, and we know that many young people are struggling with body disorders, eating problems, body image issues. And part of the I guess the challenge, I think, focuses here around what it's like for girls to grow up at this particular moment in time. And so much of what we ask of young people is to resist these messages, to resist weight stigma, to resist media images, to resist idealized pictures or images that they see online. And this is really at odds with the constructed sense of self, which is circulating in our contemporary moment. And this has been referred to as sort of post-feminism, this idea that, well, feminism has been achieved. Women and girls now have access and opportunity to all those things that they have fought hard for. So education, freedom, choice, flexibility, and optimal living. So girls are, I think, battling in particular this tension between all of these challenges and problems around living up to these expectations, whilst also being told that we are now in an era where they can have it all. So we see a great deal of burden and tension being placed on the individual. And elsewhere, we've seen this notion of post-feminist healthism emerging, that girls in particular are very targeted in these sort of health messages. Forms of surveillance, monitoring, and disciplining of women and girls' bodies is very strong, particularly within digital environments. And one of the terms that I find particularly helpful in understanding this is this idea of affect. It affects us in a very visceral and embodied way. So even if we encourage young people to be critical of these perfect bodies that they might see online, it's one thing to recognize that those pictures are perhaps photoshopped or not real. But for many young people, they tell us it doesn't stop them feeling like they want to look that way. And I think that's our real challenge. Young people already know that many images are not true, they're not real, but it doesn't stop them desiring to look that way. And I think for me, that is the fundamental challenge that we have in trying to create more healthy and inclusive cultures. So this quote here, I think, just sums up what I'm sort of these very complex ideas I'm trying to put across. But young women are doubly constructed as ideal, flexible subjects. They are imagined as benefiting from feminist achievements and ideology, as well as from new conditions that favor their success. So things might feel optimistic, but they're then battling these very difficult gendered inequalities. And all of this is learned. So again, much of what I do is focused around what are these social sites of learning about gender, learning about health. And it's a highly performative and practiced, embodied sense of learning that really interests me here. This notion of affect. How do we learn through the body? How do we feel embodied sensations that make us drawn towards wanting to look a certain way or develop a certain body? And of course, this learning, we know, is very well recognized now in the literature as not just taking place in school, but many young people tell us that actually the most popular place for learning about health is the digital. So this is bringing me to this very theoretical idea of how I'm thinking about learning as embodied, affective, and material. And I think this is a really helpful conceptual resource for us, because it also helps us think about what digital devices do, how they feel, what happens when they fail, how do you feel when your Fitbit buzzes. All of these things take us into a kind of different way of thinking about learning. It also recognizes that learning is constantly unfolding. So we think about becoming, we're always becoming different bodies or learning different things. And for me, that's really great because it leaves us feeling a bit optimistic that there's also space for change. So, digital health. So I'm going to draw here on a project that was funded by the Wellcome Trust in collaboration with Salford University and the University of Canberra in Australia. So the website digitalhealthgeneration.net, we now have a series of videos, some of which are targeted at policymakers, others for education, and so on, but a whole set of resources on that website, so you can follow up there. But some of the research that I'll talk through today, it can be found in the report that can be downloaded from that website. So the background to this was really recognizing that young people were perhaps the most significant group that we needed to research at that point around digital technologies. They are sold the promise of digital health, that it will be the solution to public health crisis, it will help them become more informed, and that they were the first generation growing up experiencing this digital healthcare system. One of the implications of that is that they will have a great deal more of their data archived across the lifespan than we will by the time we reach our later stages of life. And there are questions there about how locked in that data is and who has access to it and what it will be used for. So there are risks around that. They're not necessarily digital natives, even though they've grown up in that era. There is a great deal of inequality around digital technology, particularly when it comes to young people in terms of not just access, but digital health literacy. And those inequalities continue, I think, to persist around gender. There are risks associated with social media and sharing of information, and perhaps one of the sort of key things that I want to emphasize today is that they are now subjects of increasing surveillance. So digital technologies are collecting information on all sorts of behaviors and everyday practices. And what we found in our research and others, so Victoria Goodyear's another scholar here in the UK doing research in digital technologies and young people, we know that many adults feel ill-equipped to guide young people through these digital health choices and technologies. And I just wanted to put up a few examples of what might be the landscape of digital health. So we know now that fitness trackers, Fitbits, and other wearable sensors and technologies are targeting an increasing younger age group. So primary age children being equipped with fitness trackers. These are often marketed as play, or toys, but they're actually designed to collate data on how much your child is moving or playing in that sense. We've got technologies that are designed as games, but perhaps not necessarily with health in mind. So Pokemon Go, I think, is a really great example of that, which got people moving around, but not framed as such as a health technology. We see increasing gamification. So Zombies Run, I think, a really good example of how we might make a very mundane activity such as running more interesting. So for those of you that don't know, Zombies Run is a bit like Strava. So you're sharing your running route, but you're running to a kind of story around a post-apocalyptic world and given tasks. And you have this kind of zombie environment that you're running in. So it changes the way in which you're interacting with your the space around you. And I think that notion of gamification is really exciting in terms of what we might see happen, for example, in physical education. Much of the marketing around these technologies remains highly gendered. So just this image here on the left-hand side, the sort of Barbie app compared to the car app for boys and girls. And it's heavily moralized. So this is an app called, it's a carrot app. I'll say a little bit more about this later, but it uses a language which is very degrading and humiliating and made to make you feel bad about any kind of weight gain. And then finally, technologies which are used on young people to monitor what they're doing. So they are heavily immersed in this environment. And again, for me, this is really important in thinking about health education. So it's learning in a public space, so digital health, but a public pedagogy, and is now just really inextricable from the way in which young people are learning about bodies and health. So these devices or platforms that young people are learning are part of an arrangement of things. And that leads us to questions around affect. How does it make people feel? What can it do? What are the inequalities, opportunities, risks, but also potential for change as part of the social life of digital data? I think we really need to recognize the inseparability of bodies and devices. I suspect most of us are sat at our desks right now with our mobiles nearby, but this idea of technology being tethered to our body makes it very difficult for people to opt out of these kind of environments. And of course, as soon as we buy a mobile phone, it's already tracking our digital health data in the background, unless we know that we need to turn that off to stop tracking taking place. So we're in a very different digital environment to say 5 to 10 years ago. We also need to understand the context in which these digital practices take place. What are the relationships between, for example, when we look at our digital health data and the people that we share that with? What's the connection between, for example, digital data and parents, doctors, and health professionals? And finally, I think for me, one of the key points when we think about technologies is to not buy into this idea that they are either inherently positive or oppressive. We see these headlines all the time. Technology is bad, it leads to couch potatoes and young people being sedentary. And on the other hand, that this techno solutionist narrative that technology will save all of the kind of health crises that we're in. It's both of these things and at different times, and the digital is incredibly complex. Okay, so just in terms of the research that we did as part of this Wellcome Trust project, so we had 3 phases. The first was a large-scale survey, which was a case of simply mapping what it is young people were using, at what age and how often, and what kind of technologies they felt were useful for health. Phase 2, we then followed up with more in-depth qualitative data to really understand how young people were discovering health information, how they selected it, how they saw what was reliable or safe, what they were doing in terms of sharing or employing that health knowledge in terms of their health behaviors, or perhaps resisting it. And I think one of the most interesting things, certainly for me, was the role of different actors, parents, teachers, and so on, and different agencies in engaging them in digital health technologies. The third phase, which was an ethical minefield, was collecting real-time data using the app WhatsApp. So we did an 8-week study where we gave young people a Fitbit, and we interviewed them throughout that process, spoke with their families, their parents, siblings, and spoke to them in real time on WhatsApp as they were using that Fitbit. Part of the reason for doing that was to better understand place and space. How does being in a particular environment shape how they were engaging with that Fitbit and how they were making sense of that technology? So I think, if I may, perhaps we could just do a quick question and answer in the chat. So I'm just curious to see what people might think the answers to this would be. So in terms of our research, perhaps you can just put some answers here in the chat box. But at what age do you think most people were getting their first mobile tablet or tablet that was internet enabled? So if it's possible, feel free to put an answer in the chat box. So at what age do you think young people were getting their first mobile or tablet? Great. Okay. Thank you for the responses. So we're seeing a range from about 9, or youngest 8, yes, 8 to 12. Okay. So second question, what percentage from our research, so in our out of 1,000 young people, what percentage do you think were using their mobile phones for health? So again, if you can just post some answers in the chat there. Okay, quite a spread of answers there. Great, thank you very much. And then just finally, what percentage do you think we're using, this is very specific, apps to track their health? So things like diet, weight and fitness apps. What percentage of young people from that survey? Okay, so most people have gone slightly lower for that figure of tracking. Thanks very much for your participation there. So I'll just bring up the results, and some of you might be surprised by this, but so 75% of young people in our research, by the time they were anywhere between 8 or 11, they had their own internet-enabled device. And as you'll see later on, they were often left to search for health information in a way that was unregulated or unmonitored. And that, of course, brings up all sorts of challenges and risks. 55%, so over half of that population, were using their mobile phone. That was their primary way to learn about health. And 52% were tracking and monitoring their fitness or health, which means from a very young age, they are placing their bodies and their behaviors under surveillance. So for me, that was quite an eye-opener and quite an interesting figure in terms of just understanding how immersed they were in these digital cultures. So let's look specifically at some of the risks and challenges associated with this. Now, in terms of tracking, I'm going to include here not just Fitbits and tracking devices, but also the way in which people monitor what they're doing in social media spaces. And part of the reason for this, of course, is that those things are often connected. So what we do and track, we often share online. So the most popular, sorry, just go back to this one. So the favorite social media application for health when we asked young people were image-based, so Instagram and Snapchat. And what we heard time and again was that young people like to see images of the bodies that they wanted to look like. So these more visual forms of learning were really important. And also in terms of having the knowledge around what types of training or foods, etc., that they should be engaging with. And there was an interesting tension here. And I think for me, this really captures the challenge that we have as adults involved with developing healthy environments around digital health. But we asked them, what kind of online content do you think has helped you better understand health? And overwhelmingly, it was YouTube. And there was all sorts of reasons for this. But what was interesting was the second one was this need for guidance. So official information. So in the UK, the National Health Service, or Bupa. So young people talk repeatedly about this environment of digital health being confusing, conflicting information, and that actually, whilst they could learn a great deal through YouTube, such as training programs or diets, they also needed guidance. So there's quite a tension there, I think, in terms of the processes of pedagogy or learning about health. And YouTube was for them the top site. I mean, this might have changed even now, just a couple years on, You know, apps and technologies become obsolete very quickly, but YouTube was the top site to help them understand health better. And partly this was about the need to find other young people that were relatable, particularly when we talk about mental health, and people experiencing similar things, or having the body type that they wanted to look like. This was particularly relevant for boys. So boys talked a great deal about muscularity and the need to follow weight training programs from others who had the bodies that they wanted to try and achieve. There's a complex relationship around trajectories of digital health. So they often find information because they've been directed to it, not because they've searched for it. But followers, likes, cookies and suggestions. So algorithms and big data is becoming more and more important in this environment. And peer influence was really significant also in terms of recommendations of who or what to follow online. So consistent with other research, our participants reported both negative and positive aspects of use. There's a great deal of vulnerability of young people associated with this digital media engagement, and this is well documented in terms of social media. And overwhelmingly, there's a real gender difference in the data. So boys tended to reporting of using digital health technologies to develop muscularity, whilst girls described concerns over body weight and dieting, and sometimes often obsessive practices of using technologies for dieting or weight loss. And gender was influential in the type of content that young people watch. So boys often described wanting to learn about health and fitness from other young men or boys, particularly social influencers, and in terms of developing muscular physiques. And therefore YouTube was a very common platform for learning about weight training. And you can see the quote on the screen here in terms of talking about the body being important. I stay healthy and fit, and sometimes it's inspirational. I will watch a video and think, oh, I want to try that. If he could do it, I can do it. So this idea of it's simply a case of putting effort in, but this notion of comparison that we see time and time again when young people are watching these media. And part of the sort of emerging culture in our contemporary moment, of course, is around this trend that we're seeing, particularly in these image-based social media, around fitspiration, which involves this mixing of words of fitness and inspiration. And there's been some research actually that has looked at the overlap between fitspiration, where we see these highly perfected muscular bodies with these very moralized slogans that are supposed to motivate us in terms of don't quit. If you don't feel pain, you're not really exercising hard enough. All of these quotes that we hear in these environments. But there's been some concern that what we're seeing are images that have also been associated with a movement called pro-anorexia, which is a sort of digital culture that's emerged over the last 10, 20 years, which sort of crudely put is the promotion of anorexia, where young girls are sharing images of exceptionally thin bodies as a way of inspiring their anorexia. Those spaces, of course, can also be spaces of support. So I don't want to sort of caricature them, but it's simply to point to the literature and research that the images that we're seeing in these environments are highly gendered. They're often edited or photoshopped, but also are accompanied by many moral imperatives as to how people should look and how they should live their lives. Alongside this, examples of hashtags such as Transformation Tuesday, the idea of telling you what you should look like and how we can transform our bodies in often unrealistic ways, and perfect bodies circulating in social media were often referred to by the girls in our research and included very strong cases of weight stigma. So returning to the sort of opening comments about affect, what we were hearing in this research, particularly from girls, was that regardless of whether these photos or these images were real or fake, there are materialized affects which they experience just by engaging with them. So by seeing them, they want to look that way. So often these media literacy programs, which are about helping young women to understand those images are photoshopped and not real, aren't really going far enough in helping them to navigate and cope with these very powerful images. And again, a quote here from one of the participants talking about comparing themselves online and how everybody does it, and talking about summer bodies and getting hate from other people. So it's a very difficult expectation that we put on them in terms of asking them to opt out of those digital environments. And work by Maria Jose and Sarah McIsaac, who's also here today, that we've worked on, connects that with this idea that I spoke about earlier in terms of the post-feminist rhetoric or ideals, that girls can have it all now. So don't just be thin, but also be muscular. The notion of if we consume the right products, if we engage with the right media, buy the right fitness products, that we can all have a body like this. Very little acknowledgement of social inequality, stigma, opportunity, access. All of that is written out of these ways of thinking about health. And again, the implication of that is that young people are left feeling like they have failed, they feel guilty, and they don't feel good enough because they see that if they don't look that way, that it's their fault, it's their failing. Wow, they can do it, then why can't I just get up and go to the gym? So it becomes a matter of individual motivation. And girls in particular reported these pressures to learn how to create and modify digitized images of their own bodies in ways which looked like these perfect, healthy bodies. So they were engaging with micro practices of editing and sharing images of themselves, and also seeking out and commenting on images of each other. So these can be very toxic and highly pressured environments. And there's some very interesting work, I think, in education, which helps us make sense of this, around what is called pedagogies of consumption. So rather than focusing on consumption as simply the selection and purchase of products shaped by the market, consumption comes to be understood as everyday life practices that have to be learned. And we learn that, of course, through adverts, through media, through peer culture. But it challenges this idea of just free choice. But we know that health is very much about commercialization and consumption, and part of this broader process of globalization. So it's no surprise that the digital has become part of this, but it's an incredibly persuasive way of learning about the body, that this idea that if we buy and consume the right products, that we will simply achieve that the bodies that we see in this marketing. And here's just a few examples of that, I think. So the brands and products that we're seeing social media influencers now promote are examples, I think, of particularly girls' bodies being subject to processes of commercialization and capitalization. So the example on the right here of a social media influencer who created a workout guide called the Bikini Body Guide. But these are, again, highly influential sites. So again, some quotes on the screen here. I follow people that make smoothies and stuff like that, and healthy stuff. but it connects with this idea of fit femininity. So these social media influencers were highly pervasive. We might even class them as pedagogues. They're educating young people around health. Whether that's in a positive way or not is perhaps something we can talk through in the debate this afternoon. I had the pleasure of examining Sarah McIsaac's PhD, but I think this is a wonderful piece of work which really showed the significance of how these environments shape what happens online, shapes what happens in other social contexts. So I think this study in a Scottish secondary school showed how this kind of celebrity-esque culture within social media actually shaped what young people were doing within physical education. And Sarah may say more about that today, but I think that's a really crucial point for me, that physical cultures that happen digitally, they don't just operate in an online way, they are impacting all of these other social sites and contexts of learning. And they lead to something called lateral surveillance. So it's not just a case of organizations or adults looking at young people, we are all looking at each other. So surveillance is no longer top down, it's something that we do and comment on routinely, what we eat, how much we've exercised, and often weight is described as the kind of last form of legitimized discrimination, that we still feel it's okay to comment on someone's weight if they're overweight. But a great deal of peer surveillance happening in these environments. And opting out of these immersive and always on media networks is very hard. So perhaps one of the things we might discuss today is how we create moments where young people can almost opt out of being in the digital world, having breaks from it. So wearing the Fitbit, but not all the time. But again, a question that we might discuss today. Many are aware that these images are photoshopped, but literacy is not the same as being able to resist stigma or be free of the desire to want to look that way. That's a real challenge for us, I think, particularly as educators. And we need to think about these affects and discriminations of particular bodies that happen both online and offline. And often the ways in which young people are thinking about health might come into conflict with gendered social norms, and particularly for young girls, which is about pleasing their peers, displays of niceness and performing happiness as part of this post-feminist way of thinking. And just moving specifically onto some of the tracking and quantification that we're seeing in these environments. So this quantified self movements, it involves a concept of self-tracking and reducing our health essentially to numbers. So perhaps a good example of that is the way in which, this notion of achieving 10,000 steps a day. Is that relevant to all people? What happens if you have a disability, or if it's the first time you're re-engaging with physical activity? So there's a critique of the way in which apps reduce complex health behaviors to numbers, and this idea of the quantified self being quite problematic in terms of how we think about health. And I mentioned earlier this focus on young people, and we're seeing all sorts of messages within these adverts. So I'm just going to share with you a video now. So this is one of the latest adverts for Fitbit, which is targeting young people. Can we hear the sound on that?
Yes.
Yep, okay, I'll carry on playing. So, of course, there we see that the consumption practices that if we simply purchase this tracker, which is for ages 6 and upwards, again, I think that's an interesting thing to discuss today, that life will be happy, family life will be great. And of course, you can, I think, see the gender stereotypes in that marketing. But we know that much of the impact of wearables is particularly short term. Interest declines very quickly, so typically 6 weeks. Design, functionality and feedback are really important, but we perhaps haven't engaged young people enough in that design process. And often they're focused on cardio rather than a whole range of other sort of physical activities that young people might be engaged with. And we also know that this is being referred to as nag technology. So these constant reminders can be described by young people as quite annoying and actually quite disruptive to their health practices. So of course they are a critical mass in the digital health landscape, apps and wearable devices, but they are not subject to the same form of regulation as, say, medical devices. So we're seeing a whole range of thousands and thousands of devices and apps that young people have to choose from. And these can monitor all sorts of things from sleep, calorie intake, exercise, menstruation, and sleep patterns. They do provide opportunities for new learning, and many of the young people described how it was motivating initially, and could be quite useful for mental health and well-being, self-tracking and understanding their health better, and an opportunity to collect data that they perhaps didn't have before. Young people also describe convenience and immediacy, so having quick access to something as being quite helpful. It led to some changes in health practices, but often those were quite short term. There was a huge expectation, which they understood to be dutiful and informed citizens, particularly girls. And parents repeatedly told us this too, that these technologies were good because it gets kids out there looking for information and becoming more informed, responsible citizens. And again, something which has been problematized, this idea, well, why should all of that burden be placed on the individual? And some concerns from young people about where does this end? So this idea of seeing themselves as lacking, if they compare themselves to these quantified norms, they often were left feeling guilty, shameful, and like they were failing because they didn't meet these quantified expectations, and quite often didn't actually achieve the results that they wanted. So this young boy talking about following all these guidelines on the app and then looking in the mirror and asking, why am I not ripped yet? Why am I not achieving this kind of body that I see in these images? And this is the example of the Carrot app, which I think is just an awful example of the kind of language that we see used in some of these technologies, but it's sort of a parody, but I think for me points towards some of the moralizing that we see within digital health tech. So one of the things that we're beginning to see clearer connections with is this idea of the body as a boundaryless project, that there is no end. So you just keep going and keep going with these technologies, and that there was no point at which young people would say, well, now I'm fit enough, or now I am healthy enough. So many of them told us that what they would like to see was a technology that actually told them that you're over exercising, or you need to limit what you're doing. Family environments were highly influential. So some young people described league tables or leaderboards within their family environments where they would compete against each other to see who had done the most steps or the most physical activity that week. And again, I think this is the quote which really captures the essence of my talk today. There is no finish. There is never a finish. You need to keep going. We will see a video of something, or someone will see a video and they will tag me in. Oh, I tried this today. I can do 10. reps, 10 sets or whatever, and then you'd be like, I can be even stronger than him. So this idea that you do more and more and more, this kind of limitless performance. And in some cases, those technologies had become so problematic that it led to obsessive practices or disordered eating. So this is one example of a 14-year-old girl who developed quite problematic dieting and eating issues as a result of using this app. And her sister had noticed this, and the app had to be taken off of the phone. But other evidence elsewhere that these sort of self-monitoring practices can lead to disordered eating or over-exercising. And we know that many, particularly girls, are prone to this, but also an increasing number of young boys and men. And there is a sense of not knowing what is healthy. Many young people reported that they do what they like online, and that makes it very difficult to know what's credible and reliable. And many of them worry about the correct information, or not knowing what was reliable or safe. The second thing I want to sort of point out in terms of one of the risks is the amount of labor and burdens that are placed on people when we ask them to actually track. So even just inputting data itself and data logging can lead to ambivalence and apathy, but also a sense of guilt and having to work in order just to track that data. So this was one of our participants in the Fitbit phase, talking to us on WhatsApp and saying, you know, that this was sort of counterproductive, that there was the thing for like eating and drinking, but you have to log it each time you drank, so then it will show how much you have. I just think surely that defeats the point. I don't know how much water I've drunk. I thought you're meant to like feel it with my pulse or something. What if I forget? So all of these anxieties around using these technologies, it shows that it's far from these digital promises or solutions that you see in the marketing. And of course, overwhelmingly, it's creating data and more data on these young people's bodies and visualizations. And for some of them, it's very difficult to make sense of. So one of the inequalities that emerged from our project is that particularly middle class children and young people had a much broader network in which they could talk to adults and health professionals about that data to help them make sense of it. And we often found that young people in those lower socioeconomic groups were left on their own to try and make sense of these complex visualizations or data about their bodies. And quite often that data is at odds with what they might feel or experience in their bodies. So this raises all sorts of questions. Again, perhaps some things to discuss today, but how are young people making sense of how they're being measured and the data that's generated? What happens to that data? Where does it go? How does it intersect with social media? Is it used in third parties? How is it made sense of and compared against other knowledge? I'm aware of time, Maria Jose. I'll be wrapping up in the next few minutes. Tensions arise between biomedical knowledge, which quantifies their knowledge, but also what their bodies might feel. Okay, and because of that, they're quite willing to share data with other people to try and help them to make sense of that. And family is incredibly influential in helping them to know their bodies. And this was a comment which I think really struck me during the research. So this was one of our researchers talking about a participant, Bethany, and when she spoke to her on WhatsApp, she said she didn't sleep very well, but her Fitbit had told her, you have actually slept well. So this sensing, feeling body being at odds with the quantified data from her app. I'll just skip through to these. I think mindfulness and mental health is also something that we might discuss in the panel today. And I think, again, there's some tensions here with them being used for very good reason in terms of social connection, mindfulness, self-harm, depression, but also being quite problematic in terms of how people are now, or young people are tracking and quantifying mental health and placing that under forms of surveillance. And there's some key points there in terms of we're seeing a rise in mental health and meditation apps during the coronavirus peak. Some benefits to this, but again, the duty of care, given the popularity of these apps, I think needs to be revisited, and how we might use these, for example, in schools. And there's a useful study here, which if you're particularly interested in any of these mental health or mindfulness issues, which you can go away and have a look at in terms of teachers' own experiences of using these. So just to wrap up, some of the risks and challenges, I think, is this gap between these apps and disaffection and what we feel, rather than just what we're telling young people to learn cognitively. This rise in obsessive practices, so disordered eating, over-exercising as a result of tracking, struggles with guilt, anxiety, and disappointment in response to the metrics and quantified knowledge being created. And for this reason, we often see quite short-term engagement, but much longer on apps, but longer-term engagement with social media. And we know that many of the popular users who are engaging with these are already involved in fitness and health. So there are also questions around inequality. So I think a challenge is helping young people interpret and navigate these environments. They can become bored and overwhelmed by the vast amount of data. It's highly gendered. There's a lot of labor involved. And many people have apps but don't then go on to use them long term. And I'll just conclude on this point, but it's really this idea of this pedagogical gap. So this disjuncture between young people talking about these problems and challenges that they have, but feeling that there is a real gap between them and the staff and the adults in their lives, that it comes down to impersonal interaction. So it becomes very difficult to talk about some of these sensitive problems that they're dealing with in these digital communities. So I think one of the things that we can talk about today is how we challenge that and create a different kind of relationality in schools. And again, I just want to point towards this resource, which was put together by the PhD researcher in collaboration with Anorexia and Bulimia Care, but it's a really useful resource for schools in terms of developing a more inclusive, healthier environment, I think. So I'll finish there. I've gone a few minutes over, so apologies for that, and thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you very much, Emma. I think it has been very, very, very interesting. All the mapping around digital health and gender and all the studies and ideas. So I really appreciate all the effort you are doing today, just to illustrate us and all the audience about all these different areas that, and some of them quite emergent area for research and quite new for all of us. And I also recommend just to have a look at this resource related to eating disorder. It's very, very interesting, I think, for teachers and educators can be really, really nice. So we have here some comments. Brilliant. I'm going to read to translate it. Brilliant, the presentation, and with a feminist perspective. So I think audience appreciate that feminist approach that it's embedded in all your works. So congrats very much, Emma. I don't know if we have 5 minutes just to ask some questions. Excellent presentation, other person right here in the Spanish. So if you have any question, I think it's a very good moment just to ask directly Emma, and she knows about nearly everything, I think. So about all this topic, yeah. When we meet together just to do the research, she always have this critical approach and good ideas just to move things forward. So, is there any questions apart from?
I'm very happy to take any comments or questions on email if people want to digest and process and contact me about any of that research, or would like to be in contact with any of the people I've collaborated with on those projects as well.
Thank you very much, Emma. So I think we're going to have time just to continue our discussion in the panel discussion we're going to have later, in which you are also invited to participate. So I think there we can continue speaking about all these things. So now is the turn of Antonio Maturo. I'm very happy to present Antonio and to have the opportunity to listen here today. Antonio is professor at the Department of Sociology and Business Law in the University of Bologna in Italy. He's the scientific director of the Center of the Humanization of Healthcare and Community health of this university, and also he coordinates the PhD program of sociology and social research. He has published extensively in the areas of digital health, using also as sociology approach, also in the areas of illness and medicalization of life. His more relevant books are Digital Health and the Gamification of Lives, how apps can promote a positive medicalization in Emerald. He has led several research projects, and now he's participating with us in this Uneuropacific funding project around the critical digital health pedagogies for PE teachers. And he's participating, I know, in a range of projects, and for example, in the Horizon 2020 project called Onco Relief, about a digital guardian angel enhancing cancer patient well-being and health status improvement following treatment. And finally, he's member of the Executive Committee of the European Society for Health and Medical Sociology, and he's organizing now the next conference that will be held on Bologna in 2022. And he, as you can see, he has an extensive curriculum in the area of sociology of digital health and sociology of health in general. And now he's going to speak specifically about apps for fitness and dieting. Antonio, welcome. Thank you very much just for being here today and having this opportunity for listening to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, Maria Jose, and thank you for all the efforts you are providing for this project, and I'm very glad to be in, and I also want to thank all the other colleagues from the other university that I know that time is rushing, so I will jump to my presentation. I will share the screen. It's always hard to speak after Emma. She's such a brilliant speaker, and I will say more or less the same things, but more boring. So that's my attitude. And my presentation is, if I find it, black and white, not so beautiful and bright like Emma's. It's conceived on, I'm trying to, I took inspiration from Soviet Union, 1971. It's a graphic I have. And basically, yeah, you, Maria Jose, you described me very well. I have always a kind of imposter syndrome when someone describe my gestures and what I'm doing. I basically I do a lot of administrative work because I am the chair of a PhD program, which is pretty engaging. And now we have had some funding from the COVID, and therefore it's really interesting on how just a small amount of money can cause a lot of trouble actually in the organization. The research I am doing, you described it very well, so I just go straight to the presentation. I will describe some theories on the obesity epidemics. I will describe some research on fattism and obesity, some of them most of them doing by others, something done by me, and Veronica Moretti, who's here, who is here. I will then go through some apps, diet apps, and try to enucleate and to present the main features of these and the risks of these apps. I will also spend some words on a kind of peculiar kind of fitness, which is meditation. And me and Veronica did before the COVID research in the US on students. They were my students at Brown, and I blackmailed them in order to do this research, and they did this research, and I will tell you some of this, and then I will try to give some points for the discussion in the round table. So I will also speak slowly. I know it's not very elegant to have a lot of things written in the slides, but probably you will understand me better. So, obesity epidemic, you know, all the figures, the numbers, people, we are getting heavier in a nutshell. Both adults and children and teenagers, we are becoming obese, and in the best situation, overweight. We do not, we have reduced, decreased the fitness activities dramatically in the last 30 years. It has become, the obesity epidemic, a dominant frame for obesity in the mass media, political discourse, and expert statement in the media and in scientific literature. The obesity epidemic has been a growing fear in the last 30 years. And, why are we gaining weight, actually? Why are we becoming heavier? I found at least 4 explanations which are not actually mutually exclusive. The political economy of globalisity, the lifestyle change model, the biological approach, and the inequality as a fundamental cause of obesity. The political economy of globalisity is this approach that analyze the strategies that corporations are implementing in order to sell more food, in order to have us addicted to some tastes, in order to the way corporations, food corporation tries to hook up us in order to eat more. And I just remember an advice that was given to a CEO, a chief executive officer of a food corporation. If a product, if you do not sell as much as expected, add some sugar. So this is pretty, in a nutshell, what it is about. The lifestyle change model is exemplified by us right now. We are sitting, we probably sat, starting from this morning, we will be sitting a few hours more, and maybe later it will not be, there will be no time to go to the gym or to go out or whatever could be health. The biological evolutionary approach is, as you can imagine, something different. It is something like kind of a mismatch between our biological, the DNA, our genetic components, and the social life. We were selected to store fat, and now we are, because 20,000 years ago and more, we we suffered from famines, and therefore the most who were fittest had the characteristic of being able to store fat. So now we are the final ancestor, the final product. We are inclined to gain fat. Once it was an advantage, now it is a disadvantage because we don't do any exercise. And inequality is a fundamental cause of obesity, because there is a very tight relationship between, nowadays, inequality and being obese. Why? Not because of information, not because poor people and less educated people do not know that some food are unhealthy, but because often if you do something very heavy, very hard works, you search for gratification in food. Also, poor people cannot access some food. There is this curious expression in English American, food desert. If you are poor, you live in places where just you can find the food. During the lockdown, we ate much more. We gained half a stone, according to a survey carried out in England, but the same can be said for Italy and for all the other countries. And half a stone is more than 3 kilos. We did, me and Veronica, research during the lockdown. We did some interviews to 20 individuals. They had all high education. They had no kids. What happened in their life during the lockdown? And it was a counter trend. They get even more organized. They had a very structured schedule, very structured timeline during the day. They did changes in the domestic geography, that is the disposition of the furniture, in order to work better, to do better fitness, digital fitness, and I mentioned the digital fitness celebrities. They had less alcohol, which was really a counter trend, because usually we drank almost the double, at least in Italy, but we have good wine, so it was not a problem. Obesity epidemic, going back to the obesity epidemic of today, moral panic that characterizes the debate on obesity is transmitted to the people themselves. Therefore, fat bodies are seen as evidence of a person's lack of restraint, so the moralization of physical appearance. Weak moral attitude and a threat to the equilibrium of a community of which she or he is a member. Also, therefore, the entire society becomes interested in disciplining those bodies which do not conform to the right mold, with no boundaries to the limits of fineness. And the refusal to adhere to the mainstream image of obesity by adopting healthy behaviors is considered as irrational and emotional, as defiance, apathy, or helplessness. And again, you see this moralization of a physical appearance, in which some physical traits are connected to psychological traits and also to moral and a moral attitude. It is likely that the strong emphasis that apps place on the possibility of motivational changes and personal responsibility reinforces this biomedical and neoliberal vision of obesity. So the biomedical and neoliberal vision of obesity is an individualized vision. So obesity is something that occurs to individuals, and basically it is a choice they have made of being in the way they are. Indeed, the possibility of sharing one's progress and of self-mutual help among the community increases motivation, and this is something which happens with apps. Diet apps allow people to share their progress. They have this affordance, this possibility, and this affordance will make our motivations stronger. So the apps seem to have the potential to transform apathetic postponer into endeavorers. These kinds of words, I guess, was invented by Deborah Lupton. So you see that these kind of languages remind us also the business language, right? And the endeavor, and it is perfectly connected to this neoliberal vision we have nowadays. It's a kind of biopedagogy, quoting Emma, that provide us with an explanation of our condition. So in this context, the disciplinary path promised by the apps invites the individual to change and to become a better person, while a deviation of too many pounds is seen as a choice made by a gluttonous and lazy person. It is not surprising then that physical appearance is stigmatized, can lead to bullies. Sorry. I found an interesting research carried out just before the COVID by some Russian colleagues. They are from the Center for Youth Studies in St. Petersburg, and they did a research based on in-depth interviews on the physical, on the body, on the body culture. So they found out that among, I mean, this is pretty representative. I'm not saying something new. But the result, the findings can be summarized in a very dry way, like this extended mania for a slim body, the phobia of obesity, the obsession with their bodies, and the constant reflection about their looks and the ideas of model slenderness. Other results, more extensively, was that despite differences in the expenses and varied stages of maturation, it turned out that all informants, without any exceptions, had one common hang-up: their weight. And this is a subject of constant anxiety and reflection. A small excess in weight causes complexes and forces young people research everything connected with diets, calories, counting, exercise, and fitness. They coined these terms: weight reflexive culture. This is how Krapets and Nartova have called this habit of idealizing model slenderness. Ideas which are broadcast by mass media, but also by digital social networks, and reproduced by the youth subculture. So I emphasize this subculture because it is a key word according to me. And also this idea of reflexive is also a very important word in sociology. So the consumerist society has such imperatives as outward perfection, constant care about one's own precious self, eternal youth, and a flawless slim body. So you probably also remember Benjamin Barber at the beginning of 2000, he wrote about the infant ethos that dominate capitalism. The infant ethos is that the idea that we are stretching adolescence and youth, and we are, and youth is a very long period of our life, or at least our self-perception. And I would say that nowadays we are putting emoticons in our messages and on the social networks, and we use several
chances and traits that are connected to our, probably to, not exactly, I mean, they are different as an adult wrote 30 or 40 years ago, right? So I mentioned this word reflexivity, weight reflexive culture, and I like this label because reflexivity is a salient characteristic of contemporary society, according to Giddens 1990. And why? Because as a consequence of the destandardization of life trajectories, which, I mean, we are, in sociology, we are very good in order to complicate life. Destandardization of life trajectories means that for several centuries, typically, the life was that we went to school, we have a period devoted to education, we went to for males to the army, we started working, we created a family, traditional family, we worked, we probably got promoted, then we retired, and that was all. And nowadays, we all know that the education is much more longer, and we know that we need to get updated anytime. Our procreative choices, if choices can be made always, have been postponed, and we changed job several times in our life, and so on. So there are several and different life trajectories, and focusing on reflexivity, we need to make choices. We have to make choices all the time. We need to assess constantly what we have chosen. We need to monitor ourselves. We need to surveil ourselves. We need to elaborate data on ourselves. So you see the connection with the quantified self, with self-tracking, because of course, this idea of Gary Walls of a quantified self is that we can have a data-driven life. We like an enterprise, we produce data, and we can be driven by our data. So I think that one of the important concept we could discuss today is the one of subculture. So it is that evolving the perceptions of one's own body includes assessing the bodies of other people, comparing one's own body to other people, and being validated by others. There have been a lot of studies on subcultures in drinking cultures. So groups develop a range of customs, the drinking culture, that surround the alcohol consumption. These customs cover what they drink, how much they drink, where they drink, and the intended level of intoxication. These customs make up the drinking culture of a group. Informal norms, habits, and frames that affect, if not determine, alcohol consumption among peers. Parental attempts to restrict the teenagers' contact with alcohol seldom lead to a reduction in drinking. On some occasions, parental actions actually increase the risk of young people getting too drunk. So very, very close to the idea of subculture is the peer group. So the term peer culture was originally introduced in 1988, and it was referred to nursery settings, actually, not to adolescent.
and it had three features. Children in these settings appear to adhere and to behave according to a set of social rules and behavioral routines. And if such rules are breached, then comments and negotiation between children follow. Children in these settings share a mutual understanding of actions and norms for procedures. So it's a small culture which can determine some images, some values, some behaviors. So I would now share a video, very quick, very short, a couple of minutes, and then we go back to the slides, and I will be very fast, I promise. And I think this is really a key point. This video is really effective.
You're right. You are a fat loser.
Everything okay, Katie?
Yeah, I'm fine. Are you sure, sweetie?
Like, is everything okay at school?
I said I'm fine. Can you just leave me alone? I don't appreciate you picking on my friend. Kate is amazing and unique, just like every other person in this school. And if you have a problem with any of us, well, you should just keep it to yourself. Do you have any idea how much that could hurt someone? And guys, we are just as bad if we just sit here and do nothing. Why do you have to be so mean? See that she's hurting. I'm sure she's hiding scars. To the only remaining naked wounds, her shoulders down. There's a boy who carries her great weight. He is often to the
The latest research shows that 1 in 3 children are directly involved in bullying, as the perpetrator or the victim, or sometimes even both, which means we've all seen it.
As a young person, by standing up to a bully and telling them that it's not okay, you have a 50% greater chance of stopping schoolyard bullying than a teacher does.
If you're a caregiver or a parent and you think that your child is being bullied, your participation in this is so important.
So visit www.
Okay, so I think that it's not a revolution of ideas, but I found it interesting because this video was not addressed to the victim nor to the perpetrators, but to what, I don't know if the expression exists in English, the silent majority. So all the rest, which is the majority and can do something for stopping these behaviors. So I will now switch abruptly to the diet apps and some features that can be described of the apps, generally speaking, but for sure for diet and fitness app. So quantification is for sure one of the most important feature, and I will not describe it so much because it is pretty clear. Big data are an important issue here. So quantification is the transformation of several kinds of data, also qualitative data, into measurable data and measurable information. Another important feature of, and so you see this is also another example, but I mean, it is becoming, it is pretty clear. It's interesting to see the wording, sleep efficiency. You know, this efficiency is not something usually related to sleep. Gamification is also was mentioned by Emma, and it can be viewed as a process by which non-game activities are represented in a game-like form. Some researchers use the term ludification, which is a broader concept incorporating gamification. And gamification has been used extensively in education programs to promote improved motivation and outcomes. And currently, gamification is considered one of the most innovative and promising marketing tools. So the idea of a reward is at the basis of gamification practices, framing behavioral changes in terms of point gained, places on leaderboards, badges received, and similar markers in order to encourage users. So gamification is something which should strengthen our motivations to for changing. So the gamification has played for a long time a cognitive function, according to several scholars like Erickson, Freud, Mead, but they also, gamification also support people in pursuing goals and improve performances. So gamification also play a performative function. In apps, in diet apps, sexuality is present. There are several examples, avatars, sexualized avatars. So this is connected to this biopedagogy, the idea of a sexual body, which often is is also a very thin body. So two things in one. Medicalization is also, so I'm going very fast, is also a characteristic of diet app, because obesity is defined by the body mass index, which is, of course, a scientific index, but it has also some disadvantages. Calorie intake is the point. Everything is reduced to calories. Quantification is all. Language is a pseudo-scientific one. And what is interesting when we think about digital environment is this idea of the obsolescence of the idea of the Panopticon. So the Panopticon was, this idea was created by Jeremy Bentham, and it was the idea that in a prison, from one tower, one guard could watch all the prisoners. So it was a really efficient way to surveil people. Nowadays, we use apps, and we can share our states. We can share our progress. We can get we can have help from other members of a dieting community, and anyone is watching each other. So there is not anymore someone, a superior entity, but we are all the guardian of someone else, which is a bit uncanny also. What are we watching? We are watching and we are surveilling physiological data often. We can share our most intimate data, that is our weight, and also, but nowadays it is pretty delicate issue, the idea of if we have a fever and so on. So I use this word, endopticon, the surveillance of internal states, molecular surveillance. And we were talking about Fitbit. You know that in some private insurance will give you the Fitbit for free, and then you are obliged to use it. I'm talking about health insurances in the US and other countries. So the health insurance will have access to your physiology, to your to the state of your body, and this is pretty dangerous from a social justice perspective, because we know that if this digital control and we know that poor people have much more problem of the better off to conduct a healthy life. So me and Veronica, we did a research. We made my students in the US at Brown University download an app, Headspace, which is now actually became very popular not after our study, but later on, because it is also on Netflix. And they did digital meditation for some time, and then they had to answer our questions. So they felt better. They had some improvement. They were able to reduce their daily stress, their fatigue. Someone focusing on their body too tightly found out a lot of pains and a lot of things that usually he or she didn't pay attention on. So excessive knowledge sometimes is detrimental. A lot of students, and we had more than 200 questionnaires and interviews, said that meditation helped for productivity, and you see which this idea of productivity, how one was far away from meditation. So meditation was something opposed to productivity. It was something alternative, something different. Now, digital meditation is related to functioning. And yoga as well. They are a functional deceleration practice, as Artmund Rosa would put it. So I think I am running out of time, and I will jump to the conclusions. There are several features also related to medicalization, and the students, probably because several of them would have applied for medical school, used medical expressions. And however, this research reminded me a previous research done by Christine Barker on mindfulness, and she found out some interesting features and characteristics of mindfulness. But we will, I think I will, I will leave you the slides, so you can see it with more being more relaxed. So in order to go through the conclusions, I found this prehistorical image about the elements of a communication. So this is not something we can use anymore, because communication is much more complex nowadays. But I think we could work on the decodification of the discourses, of bodily discourses into the digital society. We should focus on how we can translate and decoding some images of the body nowadays. So I don't have real conclusions. There are unconclusions, some messages for round table. And given that our society is imbued of thinness ideas, of very dangerous ideas of what is beautiful, what is cool, what is healthy. And given that often the digital devices, apps, but also social networks reinforce these ideas, the words I would like to discuss, the points are this idea of on life, this third dimension above, off and on. On life is the diagonal dimension. So we can discuss what we have been participating in the digital dimension. And in the classroom, I think that the discussion on what the young students do in the digital, I know it's not a panacea, but it is something that should be evoked, that should be done very frequently. I think that irony should be used also into this. So I think that this idea of the body, of what is very beautiful, of what is the best body, should be should be treated also with irony. I don't know actually how, but it should be important to create a kind of guerrilla, a digital guerrilla, which deconstruct with irony some images of beauty. And of course, as the very short video I found, the target, which target is not exactly a beautiful word, but I think we should address our efforts on peer groups and subcultures, and I think that's we should try to crack subcultures, deviant subcultures, and I would say not any group of adolescents probably participate in some culture, some kind of subculture. Not all the subcultures are detrimental, but some are actually. And also this idea of counter-ballism should be promoted, as the video showed, which of course is not an original idea, but it is somewhere to start. This is because I think we live now into, and especially the youngest generation, in this idea that some bodies are pathological, some bodies are not beautiful, and as Emma said, there is no limits. We are forced to this enhancement continuously, and this is really dangerous, because living without a limit can involve risk. And all of this, for me, it is a problem, because everything is embedded and imbued with this new speak done by biomedical terms and glamorous words, all circulating into the digital, into forms which are really hard to create a hierarchy. And therefore, I think that the idea of cracking subcultures and fostering peer groups could be a way, but I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Sure. I really appreciate your intervention. I think there are quite a lot of exciting ideas that you share with us this afternoon. Now we have 5 minutes just to answer some questions. So please, could you write your questions just right now through the chat, and yeah, we have just 5 minutes to discuss this. In fact, while you were speaking, I was taking some photographs of your presentation, and I just share with my sons, who are young adults or in their 20s, around this specific slide about reflexivity and how young people have to think a lot about how to take decisions, that it's something we discuss together at home in this moment of their lives. And I really appreciate all these ideas, because I read some of them, but you clearly present everything. So let's see if we have any questions. You can just type your questions in Spanish or in English. we don't have any questions. I really like it also, this how you explain this idea of biomedicalization and scientific data around all this all this data that we have continuously about our bodies and this biomedicalization of health. I think it's interesting.
We between Spanish and Italians, we don't pose real questions. We make a kind of in never-ending comments. So of course the biomedicalization is reassuring. The language of medicine is something so clean at first sight, so scientific, so precise, objective, that medicine has won sounds and no, how do you say, no, I don't remember how, but it has won as an hegemonic power. We in sociology, we write nowadays, even our essays, our articles in the journals are presented and structured as the medical articles, because we think that medicine is objective. It is something much more precise than the social sciences. But then if you read a diagnosis, sometimes it's a kind of diplomatic structure and diplomatic article, which should be deconstructed by some semiotic guy, because that's why medicine. I'm very worried about medicine, because it has even if we think about the definition always quoted of the World Health Organization, health is a complete state of physical, social, and psychological well-being, not only the absence of disease. This is a kind of condition you can have only if you're diet, and if you are in the paradise, hopefully if there is one, because it is something really difficult to achieve, right? How can we be in that situation? And any kind of difference and deviance from that ideal situation is then a pathology, and therefore can be medicalized by the ones who are the owners of this paradigm that is doctors.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I admit we can see this discourse in physical education teachers in Spain as at least very ingrained, and I'm quite worried about this, and I think educative actions are, in this critical and sociological perspective, are really needed to address all these challenges. Okay, so we don't have any questions, I think, or yeah, we don't have any questions, but I think we have time just to continue our discussion in the panel that we have at 6:30. So in 10 minutes, in 15 minutes, we are going to just have now 10 minutes of just to relax a little bit, and we will come back at seeks to continue our panel discussions all together and continue with our timetable. Okay, so we will come back in 10 minutes. And I'm going just to begin a little bit, just presenting a little bit Shirley, and then just the name of the panelist, and then Shirley, you can lead the discussion around
okay. Okay.
So,
I had, that's fine. I was just going to say I had planned on saying who people were, but that's fine. Can we have time for them to say something about themselves as well? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's
Great.
yeah, as you planned it. Welcome now to our last session. That it's a panel discussion around the topic of promoting gender equality through digital health in the school context, challenges and opportunities. I'm going to present Shirley Gray, who is going to lead this discussion. Shirley Gray is senior lecturer in physical education at Moray House School of Education and Sport at the University of Edinburgh. She currently leads the Physical Culture Research in Education Research Group. And I have the opportunity to be involved there as collaborator, working with Shirley and also with Sarah McIsaac from the University of Edinburgh. Shirley is currently involved in several projects related to both curriculum and pedagogy, with an emphasis on health, gender embodiment, and digital technology. She's working, for example, in how PE is conceptualized, interpreted, and enacted across different areas in United Kingdom. She's also working on a project on digital embodiment in physical education, and she has published extensively in all these areas. For me, Shirley is always the person who is moving things forward in our project. And just, I would like just to say just a few words just to thanks Christina just to be involved in this panel, because we know that she's not an expert specifically in the area of gender, but all her contributions I really appreciate very much, the way in which she's so involved in our project, the Europa project, and your work is being very, very valuable for me, and I think for all the team. And she has a brilliant expertise in the area of digital literacy in young children. So in this panel, we are going to be Emma Rich, that is professor in the Department of Health at the University of Bath, Antonio Maturo, professor at the Department of Sociology and Business Law of the University of Bologna, Christina Kumpoilin, professor of education at the Faculty of Educational Science at the University of Helsinki, and also leading the Children Research Center in Digital Technologies or something like that. I didn't copy this properly. Sarah McIsaac, she's currently lecturer in physical education at the Moray House School of Education and Sport at the University of Edinburgh. Veronica Moretti, who is research fellow at the Department of Sociology and Business Law at the University of Bologna. I don't know, Veronica, if you changed your title now that you are lecturer, or I don't know.
I don't know. It was just 2 days ago, and it was assistant professor at University of Bologna. Well, 2 days ago, literally.
Congratulations, because we know that you attained this position last week.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all for being here this afternoon, and welcome just to everybody to this panel about how to promote gender equality through digital health in the school context. Shirley, your turn. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria Jose, and thanks for inviting us all to be part of this this conference. It's been brilliant so far today. Really enjoyed listening to Emma and Antonio, and hopefully we'll be able to continue some of the discussions during this panel session. So hello everybody else, and thanks for joining us and staying with us. It's 20 to 6 here in Scotland, and it's pitch black outside, and I feel like I've been in here for quite a while now, but it's all worth it because some of the discussions have been so good. What we're going to do today is we're going to be highlighting some of the issues that I think Emma and Antonio have already discussed today. They've already raised, and we'll be able to explore them in a bit more detail through our discussions. So really looking at some of the challenges and the opportunities of health-related learning and teaching using technology, with perhaps a little bit more of a focus on gender and schools, just to consider some of those areas and context in relation to health-related learning. And as Maria Jose has highlighted, we've got an excellent panel here to discuss some of the key issues. And then towards the end of the session, we'll give you the opportunity to pose some questions that may be of interest or relevance to you. And you may even have some of your own ideas around this area, and it would be excellent if you could share these with us. Maria Jose has already done a fantastic job of introducing our panel members, but before we start in some of the discussions around some of these areas, I'd like to invite all the panel members now just to say hello, to say a little bit about who they are and their research. Although I appreciate we know already a little bit about Emma and Antonio, but I think we could listen to them again for that. So if I could just go around in the order you are on my screen. So Christina, you're first on my screen. Would you like to just say hello and to say a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thank you, Shirley. Thank you to Maria Jose and the whole organizing committee. What a wonderful and so important event. Thank you for the earlier speakers as well, and it is such an honor to join this panel. My name is Kristiina Kumpulainen, and as I was already introduced, I work as a professor of education at the Faculty of Educational Sciences at Helsinki University, Finland. My research area focuses on digital childhoods and digital education and learning. For a long time, I have had an interest in how digital technologies are shaping children's lives and learning and education, what opportunities and what challenges these digital technologies bring, and how this knowledge can be enhanced and knowledged in teacher education and in educational practices, even in curriculum development. So this is something that I'm interested in. I'm also very much interested in identity development as kind of how I understand it, being part of learning and development. That takes us back to the important issue of gender as well. What kind of people we are and how we are recognized, and even how the sports that we do recognize our unique identities and selves, and because they are so important, not only knowledge, but identity development. This is a short introduction. Lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Christina. That was lovely, really helpful. Now, Antonio, I know that you've spoken already, but if you could just say another hello, just to remind us of who you are and to some of your research interests. You're next on my list.
Yeah, I'm a professor of medical sociology at Bologna University. I work mostly on chronic diseases like cancer and Alzheimer. I try to understand the experience of a patient and of the caregivers. And I also have been active in some research in the organization of care delivery. And of course, I am interested, and I have done some scholarship in digital sociology with a special focus on health and wellness. I carried out some of this research in the US during my once frequent staying there at Brown University. And I am serving currently as the chair of the PhD program at the Bologna University program in sociology. So this is me in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thank you, Antonio. Sarah, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah McIsaac. I work at the University of Edinburgh, where I lecture on the MA Physical Education programme, mostly teaching on sociologically based courses. My research lies within the sociology of health, the body, and physical education. So my interests are around, particularly around young people's engagements with social media and contemporary body-related culture amongst young people. And as part of that, I've looked at or explored how individuals negotiate healthism, fitspiration, ideal body discourses, looked at ideas around embodied identities, embodied learning, and just in general, been looking at as well young people's experiences of and engagements with the PE environment. So I completed my PhD a few years ago, and that was an ethnographic study within a Scottish secondary school, looking at how young people in that context were engaging with digital technology and mostly social media to learn about their bodies, to construct their identities, to negotiate power relations. Since then, I've been on 2 lots of maternity leave, and I'm just back from a year away from work. So I'm excited to be getting back into things, and I'm particularly enjoying developing new ideas with the people in this forum on the screen at the moment. So many thanks for having me here, and I'm really looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and it's brilliant to have you back. And yeah, looking forward to hear what you've got to say during the discussions. Veronica, you're next on my screen.
So hi, buenas tardes. I'm Veronica Moretti, and as Maria says, I'm pretty, just changing my role. So I'm in this hybrid situation, academically speaking. I'm really, really happy to be here, really honored to be part of this panel. And I work at the University of Bologna, and I guess my main interest focused around the intersection between human activities and technology, with, of course, a specific emphasis on health and the digital narratives that people can, just with the opportunity offered by technological tools, we can have to just, create a new community, explain our condition, and tell our stories about our health and so on and so forth. I've done a lot of research with Antonio about the apps and how apps can work related to our well-being and fitness. And I also work a lot with creative methods in social research, specifically using graphic novels, comics, and this type of technique. And actually in Spain, you have a really huge movement called the Medicina Gráfica, which is really important because the aim is bring together the power of images with the healthcare system and see how people can interrelate these different and creative methods. So this is me, pretty much. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Veronica. That sounds really exciting as well. I can't hear to wait for your contributions. Emma, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Shirley. I'll keep this brief, as I talked far too much earlier, as it was. Yep. So I'm a professor of physical activity and health pedagogy at the Department for Health at the University of Bath in England. So in a nutshell, my earlier work, I have my roots in sociology of physical education, and much of that work kind of then expanded into what I would, I guess, capture as public pedagogy. So looking at how people learn in all sorts of other social contexts, one of those being the digital. So that's kind of brought me to this area of work. Some of the early work I was doing was around obesity policy, looking at how practices and policies around tackling childhood obesity has had an impact on young people, and with a specific focus as well, exploring the relationships between school cultures and eating disorders. So yeah, I'll probably leave it there, Shirley.
No, that's great. So it's a brilliant panel. It seems like we all have, there's an element of sameness about your research, your ideas, your thinking, but there's also that diversity as well. And I think that will make for hopefully a really interesting discussion. So the first question I'm going to ask actually is directed towards Christina, if that's okay. And given the research that you've done in schools with young people, and particularly the work that you've done in relation to digital literacies, and I know that this is a term that's frequently used in curricula and in schools, and so many teachers will be quite familiar with it as a concept. But I wondered if you could say a bit more about it and how it might be usefully applied to thinking about digital health in schools.
Thank you so much. What a rich and kind of question, and I'm very, very happy to elaborate it, and hopefully others can join me. Indeed, digital literacies is now being used in different official curriculum documents and in our everyday language as researchers and educators. Are we, after all, very clear what we mean by it? I would like to challenge it, although we use the word quite a lot. I have been, in my own research, I have been doing some analyses and comparisons around what we really mean and how researchers approach digital literacies. And the most useful theory that comes from an Australian researcher, Green, who identifies at least 3 different dimensions in digital literacies. The first one is operational, that is to do that how we learn to use different type of technologies and we learn how to operate them. Then a second dimension to digital literacies is a cultural dimension, where we learn when it is appropriate and when it is good and when it is not so good, and we know how we can participate, how we can engage with different type of digital literacies, and when the right contexts are for different type of literacies to be used. So we need this kind of cultural knowledge when we engage with digital literacies, when we communicate, in our case, when we use digital literacies for health, either in education or in home, everyday environments, either alone or individually, we have to grow into certain kind of cultures and practices with certain kind of values and roles, and they are all related. And so this cultural dimension of digital literacies is a huge, a little bit more complex perhaps than the operational dimension. The third dimension that Green proposes, not actually only for digital literacies, he proposed this framework when he talked about just any literacy or literacies. But the third one is critical literacy, and it is very important in today's society to learn to have this kind of a critical approach, both as a user or educator or consumer of different type of digital technologies and the information and knowledge that is available there. So we need to learn these critical skills. This is to do obviously in our time with kind of fake news, fake information, but also in terms of using digital health technologies to know the technologies, their limits and our own limits, and to prevent addiction or somehow wrong interpretation and wrong building of your own identity. So I think this is not only the question to the users or young people, but also how education, both informal and formal, can support this kind of a critical literacy, which is so important in today's world. We proposed in my own research earlier using this 3 typology framework to understand digital literacies. We have also been very interested and are proposing a creativity literacy to that 3 dimension, because I think it's very important not only position young people or any person into passive role, into consumer role, but also to think about also digital literacies, how they allow creativity, transformation, changing of your own worlds and changing of collective worlds and ways how we organize our lives, how we organize education, and what happens, how we can learn together, how organizations such as schools can learn. So for me, having this background and interest in agency and identity and how kind of digital can transform also worlds together with social and organizational processes is something that I'm very interested. So I think this kind of a creative agentic dimension to understanding digital literacies is something that I want to underscore. One could say probably, and if Green was listening to my talk, he might say that perhaps cultural encompasses that part in the dimension, but I purposefully want to underscore. So to sum up, digital literacy for me means, and based on my readings of literacy, operational, cultural, critical, and then creative dimension. Or dimensions. And I have found this very helpful typology to study also different kinds of pedagogies and educational contexts or informal contexts about the ways how digital literacies are being constructed into being and supported, and then looking at these dimensions. For example, one of my papers where I have been looking at maker spaces and creative engagement with digital technologies showed that actually this critical dimension of literacy is often kind of undervalued, or it doesn't come very strongly. And we have made some recommendations how to kind of support the critical dimension much more for example, in Finland, in our pedagogies across the curriculum, of course, including health education, physical education. I have been already talking quite a lot. Will Shirley give me any more time, or shall we give the floor to other people? Or I know that you had something else. I have only now started to define what digital literacy means, and I have related my response partially to schools and formal education. Is there something that you would like to ask, or shall we give the floor to others?
Well, I guess I have a question, but I'm just wondering, Emma might jump in here as well. When you talked about some of these sort of the 4 areas of digital literacies, and I can see how in schools that these could be embedded into lessons and teachers could work with this and so on. But as Emma alluded to in her lecture, not all learning takes place in schools, and some of these, you know, and then you talked about that in relation to inequalities. And I wondered, you know, where does discourse around digital literacies fit with some of the notions that Emma talked about earlier in terms of inequalities?
Yes, I think there are huge inequalities, even in Finland, where I come from, although our education system is really based on kind of equity and equality in terms of rights to have education, high quality education. Every child is entitled to that, and that's legislated. But still, even in our system with highly educated teachers, we can see groups of children and classrooms where digital literacies are differently addressed. Of course, now with the pandemic and schooling changed into online worlds, we can also see how homes have even different infrastructures, tools, families and parents and communities around child's home are kind of differently equipped to support youth and children to engage with digital technologies, education and learning. We can see huge differences in equal opportunities to learn and to engage, and also not even when we can talk not only about learning and education, just for well-being and how you spend your time, and there are huge differences. When it comes to Finland, we have a large group of children and young people who are doing well, but we have those groups, marginalized groups, that the portion is not so big, but the problems are huge. So there is a huge gap, and particularly in terms of developing social and emotional kind of their well-being is of great threat due to our world where we are. So I think in pandemic times, these challenges and disadvantages, inequalities, injustices that we see now in children's lives are really highlighted even more, perhaps. Luckily, everybody is returning back to also schools, but I think it's very important, as we have been interested throughout today, not only concentrate on schools, but learning lives approach, where we look at engagement, learning and identity building across different contexts and homes, for example, and our free time, how we spend it, where we spend it. I think there is a lot of spaces we researchers need to tackle.
Yes, definitely. And we've had this discussion about space already, haven't we? Which is another interesting area to explore. I will open this up now, both to the group, but also in terms of some of the things we are potentially going to discuss, just in terms of some of the challenges. And so I'm going to ask a question. I think there are a few parts to it. So you can take some of them, all of them, one of them, but I'll pose the question anyway and see what happens. So linking to what we've discussed already, I'm interested to know what some of the challenges are that young people face in relation to their digital health learning. And perhaps both in general, but then thinking about that in relation to the context of the school, and thinking about the theme of this conference. In what way are these challenges affecting boys and girls differently? And here we can perhaps draw from Emma's lecture and just unpack some of the ideas that she's already introduced, or we can perhaps draw from our own experiences or our own research. So there's quite a bit in that, and I'll leave it with you, and I can pause for a moment and see who wants to jump in first, or I can pick on someone who's not said much and ask them to make a contribution. Emma? Yeah, thanks, Emma. In you come.
Yeah, I guess I'll springboard a little off of what Christina has given us so much to think about there, and then leave it to others to comment specifically on some of the challenges around boys and girls, because I've probably said enough about that earlier, so I won't occupy that question. But I guess I think one of the challenges is, and it's a school issue for me, is having to reconcile competing tensions. So we've seen this with the obesity and eating disorders policy framework. So there's a lack of connectivity between how policy in schools is developed around obesity and how we then have work around body image, eating disorders, body disaffection. And we often hear teachers and students saying these are competing messages and they are in tension with one another. And as I was listening to Christina's wonderful articulation of digital literacies, I mean, a couple of things sprung to mind. First is that hasn't made its way into the policy frameworks yet, certainly in the UK, but also at a European level. So that has yet to kind of filter down into schools. But even when it does, if you take some of the media literacy that we're providing for young people, it's often very gendered anyway, in terms of what we assume about young people's experiences. But it's often ring-fenced within school. So you'll see it within a lesson on that. And then elsewhere, young people will be hearing contradictory messages. And I think for me, as we're developing digital literacy, it has to be connecting up across subject areas, but also connecting up all of these other spaces, places, and social sites, as you said, Shirley, so that the message is reiterated. Because what we're asking young people to do is ultimately opt out of the very digital cultures within which they express themselves sometimes, or be critical of them. And that's a really uncomfortable place for most young people. So I think there needs to be a much broader whole school approach to this, so that it doesn't become something that becomes compartmentalized. So that, well, we've done digital literacy and we've taught children how to be critical, engaged, because then they'll go into another lesson where they're taught about the obesity epidemic and the importance of these apps to monitor. So for me, and how we do that, I think needs to be very tailored to the inequalities that you pointed out around gender, ethnicity, culture, social class, because that then needs to be expressed in a way that is socially constructive, that really brings in young people's backgrounds and makes it relational. So, and I think, you know, you spoke to some wonderful examples of creative and critical practices, and I know in our perhaps one of the other team members might like to say a bit more about the SEED project, but the role of movement in that, and affect and feeling. So we can only be critical when we really understand what we feel when we see an image. And I think, you know, some of the educational scholars like Elspeth Probyn, who talk about, you know, in very simple terms, the goosebump effect. But when you look at a picture and you really feel something, that tells you why you're invested or opposed to something. So I think those were just the kind of immediate thoughts that I had. And I think it was a wonderful way of, I think, breaking down literacy and then thinking, how do we apply that in the context of all these challenges and risks that young people are facing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. Christina, did you have something to say?
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't, lovely response and elaboration, Emma. Really like what you are saying. And what in a way, I think I forgot to say that although I now clearly kind of distinguish these different dimensions, I think it's also important to understand that obviously in reality, they are very dynamically related. And as a researcher, it may be sometimes hard to kind of only carve one dimension out from certain kind of activity or communication pattern or whatever is your research focus. But they kind of dynamically interact and are complexly interwoven, these dimensions, but obviously together in a research team and making analyses what is happening. And for, as Emma was suggesting, like how these different dimensions could be recognized when developing a curriculum or pedagogy, I think they are helpful tools. And then we need to kind of separate them and focus on one dimension at a time. But as we know, life is much more complex than theory. So in this case also, so that is what I wanted to add as well. But thank you again.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. And thank you, Emma. That was really helpful. And I think further on in our discussions, we will come back to some of the things that schools and teachers can do to make these connections and to help young people navigate some of this sort of complex landscape. I wondered if Sarah or Antonia or Veronica had anything else to say, just really about, again, some of the challenges that young people face. Again, I know Emma talked about them quite a bit in her lecture, but maybe there's some something to add or something we could just pause at and unpack a little bit more. And again, particularly thinking about some of the differences between how young men and young women experience digital health cultures. Veronica. Oh,
Antonio, were you going first, or can I? I really want to thank you, and I have I don't know if it's, as Antonio said, being an Italian is a never-ending comment, a curiosity, a question to pose to both Emma, Christina, Antonio, so all of you. I was wondering your opinion about, because you were discussing about the role of apps sometimes in promoting digital education, digital health. So I was wondering whether, in your opinion, we are experiencing also sort of a lack to use this type of apps, in terms of most of the time when we think about some health-related apps to track our calories or our fitness, our physical activities, we don't look at these tools as in their gender related dimension. So some, especially for what concern the script theories, some of these apps, they reinforce some stereotypes as much as, let's say, in the function they present, the color they use, how a woman should perform, especially for what concern like a menstrual app or physical activity. So sometimes we experience these, apps made up by different feelings with different medical references, but also some stigma, creating this, expectation that of women and men who want to engage in interaction. So let's say some of these apps just use pink colors. They are really binary. They are really heterosexual in what we can have. So I was wondering whether we should also teach how to read an app in terms of critically use it, or more in a more reflexive way. So it's much more a curiosity about this.
Well, Antonio has his hands up, so maybe he has the answer to that question.
Oh, but being a cultural manufacturers, apps should be studied. Of course, they are a part of our material culture, but I think that Veronica, she knew the answer, because she provided so many information that I think she knew the answer already. But I would like to say a couple of things about the beautiful presentation Christina gave. I think that I would, I would change the name of your proposal for creative literacy. Nowadays, it would be meta literacy, would be cooler, because also with Facebook changing the name, meta literacy, I think could be good for funding, especially from the US. But having said that, both Veronica and Emma and Christina reminded me a concept which I had forgotten, were somewhere in my mind, because it was taught by, I used it to actually, it was on Wednesday, usually from 5 to 7, and exactly 30 years ago, I usually had a glass of wine at this time after the class of Umberto Eco, the Italian semiotician, and he spoke about semiotic guerrilla warfare. Semiotic guerrilla warfare, the resistive tactics employed by subordinate groups in constructing counter-hegemonic meanings. So at the time, his idea here stems from the 70s, and the idea was to contrast institutional discourses or institutional biopedagogy, institutional political discourses from the bottom, from subordinate, alternative, creative, artistic groups. So the idea was to deconstruct what the system was telling you about what the right family had to be, the job, your idea. So you had to do this action of deconstruction of meanings, institutional meanings. But now, after some years, we are called as, unfortunately, we are not in a creative and subordinate group anymore. We are the institutions. And as institutions, we need to deconstruct the meanings created by subordinate groups, which create fake news, which create scientific illusions, ghosts. And I think it is curious. And also when Veronica said the apps, yeah, we as a cultural product, we should have a word, also a normative word. I do not agree with what I'm saying, but I don't know why. I cannot stop it. It's the role about the things that are happening nowadays. My God, I would never have believed that I was able to become such a conservative guy. However, in a nutshell, what I will, and of course, fake news are something, while images of beauty is something much less, much more emotional and irrational, and not deliberatively, or maybe yes, maybe there is kind of also deliberation into creating an app with a sexualized avatar, perhaps. However, this is the paradox is that nowadays, as institutions, we need to understand what some signs semiotically could bring us, both in the field of COVID as in the area of beauty and of illness related to the body. And yeah, I stop here.
Thanks, Antonio. There is definitely a thread coming through of just this notion of being critical, thinking critically, but I can't help keep going back to what Emma said is, you know, being critical is not necessarily enough. It's that affect alongside critical thinking that drives us to move and change. And that could be the challenges in schools. Sarah, it would be great if you could come in.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to build upon that point, really. I think I was quite engaged with when Emma was talking about young people kind of saying, I know that I know some of these things, like I understand that some of the bodies that I'm viewing online, some of the data that I'm getting, I understand that I feel like I'm feeling oppressed by it, or I can critique it, but I can't quite feel that critique. So I have the head knowledge around it, but I can't necessarily then change my opinions or something, maybe even change my very tastes around what an ideal body is, or my very likes and dislikes, or I can't help feeling this way. And I think that's been my experience working in schools, is I've talked to so many young people who are so aware and so very critical about some of the messages that they receive through digital health technology, and feel so frustrated at the same time, saying, I know this, but I can't help feeling like this. And and I think it's interesting to then consider, well, of course that's going to be the case, because when you're, say for example, if you're engaging with social media, for example, there's so much invested there in relation to, you know, what you engage with, how you present yourself, your very identity can be tied up in that, how popular you then are within the school social kind of setting, who your friends are, who's going to be socially excluded, who's going to be admired. You know, there's this great overlap when we're talking about young people in general and schools in general. There's such an overlap between what happens in their kind of, you can't even call it their digital technology world and their school world, because they're so intertwined, and what happens within each has such an impact on the other. So there's very real consequences to not engaging with dominant norms that they might see online, or kind of dominant cultures. And that is, as Emma kind of mentioned, can be almost impossible for some young people to feel like they can switch off from. And I think one of the challenges is that within schools, it is quite often quite individualistic in that kind of, you know, just don't worry about all these things, switch off from it. And then what happens is the young person thinks, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I switch off? It must be my fault, rather than understanding, rather than being aware that there's so much more at play here beyond how, you know, your own individual negotiation of some of these things. So I think that's definitely one of the main challenges that teachers and anyone who's trying to help young people navigate this sort of environment will have.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there for some reason. Thanks, that's really helpful. And again, some things that a few of you now have alluded to is the role of the teacher and how the teacher is implicated in this. So it's not just a case of a teacher delivering a curriculum and for that curriculum to work. It's much more complex than that. And I just wonder, what are the challenges for teachers then? I mean, you know, it's not necessarily happening that, you know, we're not doing particularly well at this in schools. And this must be a challenge for teachers. And I can imagine it's a challenge for teachers for several reasons. And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts on that. So we've talked about the challenges for young people, and we've kind of turned it around and said, well, teachers in schools should be doing more. But is it as simple as that? Sarah or Emma, I think Sarah had her real hand up, Emma had her virtual hand up.
I couldn't find my raise hand button. I'm like, where's it gone? Until I've been away for a year. No, I was going to say, I think one of the challenges certainly that I found when I've been in schools teaching is just having the time to do some of this and really come up with different ideas and try out things, because I think when you're asking young people to critique some of these ideas, like Emma had said, it's not just something you can compartmentalize into, here's a lesson on this and within one subject and then go away. I think it's something that takes so much time, and a lot central to it is building relationships with the pupils that you're working with. So again, a challenge can be when you, for example, you might have one class for a block of 6 weeks and then you have a different class, or you have them for such a short period of time, they come into your lesson, they go away again. And sometimes one of the challenges is building an environment with your pupils where they feel safe debating some of these things and exploring some of these things. And that's something that can take time. It might not even just a few lessons, it can take years to build up some of that kind of ethos within a class. So I think having the time to create an environment and conducive to challenging some of these things is important, but also for teachers having the time to just process and think, and amongst all the other objectives that you have to meet in your working day, and all the, you know, you've got to meet certain curricular objectives and things, and just having the time to think of different ways of doing things. I think that's why the project that we're doing at the moment, working with teachers to come up with kind of innovative pedagogies and ways of addressing some of these things, is quite exciting, providing they have the time to be able to reflect and develop ideas and so on.
Thanks, Sarah, that's really helpful, really helpful. Emma, did you want to come into that or add to that?
Yeah, well, I think Sarah's really sort of articulated that so nicely, in terms of, you know, that saturated policy terrain, for one, that we just ask so much of teachers, don't we, that it's sort of going back to that point I made earlier about where there's tensions in those competing policies, and where there is space, and the danger is these things do get ring fenced. But I think also, and you'll know this, you know, better than I, Shirley, in terms of your work around education, but teachers' own values. You know, as we're asking young people to critique those things they're invested in, so are teachers, you know, in terms of their own digital practices, their own health practices, and that can be equally confronting and uncomfortable. And again, I think, you know, as you said, Sarah, that's where partly our project comes in. But also about this idea of co-creating with the young people that are in our classroom, that we can't assume that there is a blueprint for this. And actually, you know, really going back to Christina's point about creativity and criticality, and Antonio's, you know, more that really forcing that critique even further. And young people really have that voice right now in terms of activism and caring about the world they live in. And you know, instead of telling them what that curriculum should be, we should be really much more focused on that co-construction with them. And I remember very early work around obesity policy and teachers in different schools saying, you know, obesity isn't a priority for us. You know, we need to focus on pregnancy and smoking. And it's so varied, isn't it, in terms of what digital health literacy might look like in one school that has a very different demographic compared to another. So I think that's really crucial for me. And I think some of the work, I've put a little link in the chat, but the work that a PhD student, Neve, has been doing is really honing in on those social inequalities and differences. And you know, I think for me, that's always the starting point, is recognizing what are the health needs of this particular group of young people, and how do we co-construct some digital literacy with them in mind, because it will look very different to other groups. And then I think, again, Sarah spoke to this really nicely, but this idea that, and I've heard many teachers say this to me, I don't want to talk about fat, I don't want to talk about diets, because I'm worried young people would become anorexic, or I will send them off. And so there's this fear of, what language do I use? This is a really sensitive area. And, you know, you're asking me to talk about topics that I don't feel equipped to talk about. And then students are so on that, you know, again, the number of young people that have said, you know, with the media literacy programs, just be you. And they'll say, well, teachers are asking us to be you, but we can't, you know, we have all of these pressures and things we need to conform to. And what is me? So I think for me, it's, you know, it's that co-constructive notion, and building in criticality, but in a way that we don't do criticality in a neoliberal way, which is often what we see with literacy, which is, I'll give you the skills, learn them, and then be resilient. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I think tied in with that notion before you mentioned, Emma, about classrooms being more connected, both to each other within the school and even then the community. I think that sounds really nice. I'm actually just going to pause for a second and see if Maria Jose is there, and because I'm not quite sure how much time we have, and it would be nice to see if we have any questions from the audience. How are we doing time-wise, Maria?
I really don't know.
I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask, really just to tie things up, and I think we're sort of pushing towards that, is really, what is it that teachers can do, or what are some of these innovative ideas or practices or learning that might even just take a small step towards reaching some of these aims? You know, I'm aware that we can't change the world overnight. It is about taking these small steps. So what are they? What can we do? What can teachers do now to begin to make a difference in this area?
We have 20 more minutes. I was just listening. And
okay.
I'm afraid, can I contribute to this discussion now? Because I'm afraid I have only 5 minutes left. I then need to run.
Thanks, that would be great,
about
Christina. No, thanks,
Yeah.
That would be great. Yeah, so
thank you.
What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is that I think we privileged researchers who have time reserved for reading and thinking about these issues much more than usually teachers and educators. I think we also need these types of development projects, creative co-design activities with teachers. I think this kind of theory practice research and research development collaboration with teachers would be really, really helpful, and realizing them as much as possible. Perhaps also online, like making these accessible, what we know, what teachers know, what challenges they are facing. I think we also know that we may have, as researchers and developers of technologies, wonderful ideas, but they don't respond to the needs in the real world and in the real educational practice. And if we bring these new gadgets or our thoughts just without any learning what the real world is about, they may be for nothing. So this kind of a continuous collaborative co-design work with teachers would be very, very valuable. I think then to create structures and processes how this can be facilitated would be very important. Of course, teacher education is a key, professional development is a key, yeah, I think we researchers have a lot of responsibilities in helping out to change, but we cannot do it alone. Neither can teachers change their practices alone. And of course, young people and children and all the relevant parties involved could be invited for this effort. So that is what I see. These are dreams, and they need practical, concrete, practical way of thinking how to realize them. But I think these are very good steps. And I know that you have already done this type of work in your fields, and so happy to join these efforts in this case with physical education and health technologies. Thank you,
Christina, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I will be here for a while, but then if I disappear, I wasn't fed up or anything. I just have to leave. And thank you, Maria, again, and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Your contributions in this panel are being really amazing. I really like it. Thanks.
So does anybody want to build on Christina's thoughts there, or does anybody have any ideas they want to share about something that they've been doing in this area?
I want to say that I'm having some meetings with people in charge of educational policies at the Community of Madrid, and they saw a lot of interest in the area we are developing together, and specifically in the area of training teachers about digital health with a gender perspective or not. But what I feel is that they have the interest, but it's been difficult to reach the teachers. First, maybe because they have a lot of work to do and they feel overloaded most of the time, and it's difficult for them to find the space and the time to do this kind of things. Second, because they prefer more practical more practical knowledge just to apply to their classes. So maybe I feel that they don't see the specific application or quick short-term application of this knowledge, because I think it's a process. They also have to do it. And finally, I think that due to the pandemic, this idea of attending a face-to-face training session is being even harder for them. So I think that definitely we have to move the training, this kind of training online, to the online mode. I think that thanks to the pandemic, or despite the pandemic, we are developing better how to do it in a more engaging way. And I feel that we have to do a lot of step forward, at least in Spain, just to move all this critical knowledge to the teachers and then to the students. And it's really necessary.
Yeah, I agree. And I do wonder, we've talked about the role of affect quite a bit this evening, and I do wonder to what extent we need to move the teachers first. This work, or some of the ideas that you're giving me here, has reminded me of another project that's related to gender and how we can encourage teachers to change their gendered practices. And one of the first steps we talk about there is for them to observe and reflect on their own practice and the ways in which they are subconsciously reinforcing gender stereotypes. So to what extent are teachers, PE teachers and other class teachers reinforcing these normative conceptions of health, because that's how they practice, that's how they understand health, that those are the types of practices that they engage in. And is there a way of getting them to observe their own practices and critically reflect and be affected by, in order to then move things forwards? I don't know if anybody's got any other ideas or thoughts.
I think certainly that this is not only related to this, to their practices, it's also related or embedded in their identities. And yesterday I had a training with teacher related to this project. I didn't have time to explain because we decided just to move forward in the last week. And I think it's been difficult for them when you begin to explain all these things, just to change their minds, because you are speaking about themselves, about their own identities, and it's like everything is too much. In Spain, I think that we don't have a lot of critical thinking at the universities, specifically for PE teachers. So I think we are a step backward.
Okay. Veronica, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to come in?
Yes, I was thinking about among the opportunities, because when I introduced myself, I said that I'm working a lot with creative methods. And what I found particularly interesting in this case is the opportunity to promoting some concept, such as gender equality, through different ways and channels. I'm thinking particularly on digital visual materials. One possible way that I think it can work is the digital comic strips. There are several projects, and one I really liked is called Did This Really Happen? And basically it's a website that collects stories about different type of discrimination, gender discrimination, on body shaming and these type of things, and turn these stories, these anonymous testimonies, into comic strips. And then they spread these comics and they distribute these stories to the other people to just, make them familiar with this type of condition, raise empathy, and tell something that something happened. Or other stories that have been promoted by different associations, comic and cartoon contests of gender equalities. So I think that this type of digital materials with images can be really powerful, especially because I'm working a lot with some condition such as autism, and most of the times it's really useful to provide this material to classmates and to the teachers, so that can be familiar with the condition, and they can see if this person there is not a disease, it's simple a different way of functioning. So I think can be a good way, at least, to promoting a message.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, it sounds like affect is underpinning that as well. So it's a way to connect or really draw the participant in so that they feel something. And I guess that's something that we're trying to do with our project, but rather than through a comic strip, it's through movement, it's through their bodies, and exploring how their bodies feel and different senses and emotions and so on. Maria Jose, I'm just wondering if at some point soon, maybe now, we should see if any of the audience members have questions for the panelists. So we could open this up now.
Shirley, usually in Spain and in Italy, people do not have questions, but they can make comments.
Comments, questions or comments from any panel members and from the audience, yeah. But I do recognize the challenges of thinking of questions at this time of night after being kind of given so much information.
Yeah, and even online, it's even difficult.
Do any panel members have any questions for each other?
Maybe I'm not raising the hand because it seems that I cannot put it down then. It's no, I was yeah, I have a comment, of course, not a question, but no, I was thinking that we have that the issue of co-design and of co-production of knowledge is, as you just said about your research, it seems that we have to reframe the way knowledge is produced, both knowledge into the classroom, like probably teachers cannot tell from the up side how the students should think about health images or body conception, but they need to involve the students in something bigger and make the meanings come muddling through almost from an interaction. The notions of and the deconstruction of wrong ideas of health. At the same, in the same fashion, as university, I think that you and Maria, you are working with teachers in, as Veronica said, in a creative manner, and it is not that the university professors tell how the teachers should think. It's again something affects and practices and interactions. So the means by which knowledge is transmitted or co-created have changed in a very short time. And of course, this is something we all knew. We all know that probably it is good to repeat it sometimes. That we should use different words, not like training for teachers, but doing research all together, involving also other subjects and see what happens without predefined and clear-cut end. Yeah, that's so you can see I had no question but a comment.
No, that was a nice comment, and I think my feeling is in universities we have some freedom to do that, but I think that schools are perhaps constrained a little bit more by curriculum, content, various outcomes that they have to and targets that they have to reach. But yeah, a good comment.
Yeah, I was thinking about Noemi. She's expert. Noemi, are you there? Maybe you can put on the camera to close the panel in a few minutes. Noemi, she's expert in the area of arts and health, and we are having the opportunity to work together in projects related to innovation in teaching through interdisciplinary project, merging physical activity and arts and critical thinking. For example, last year we developed a project about photo boys or things like that. So, and it's been very, very, very productive. How students always surprise us incredibly, because they always produce something unexpected, new, different, and better than we could imagine. Always in all the projects. It's true, Noemi, isn't it? For the last 6 years, something like that. A lot of projects, different years, involving teachers of other subjects. But to do this kind of interdisciplinary project, we don't have the space to do the time to do it. One teacher has to go to the other teacher's class to develop this kind of project. And I think this is something that also happens at the schools, and it's a limitation. Yes, I think that institutions can or must help with this kind of co-creation of knowledge and providing this space and time, just specifically to do training or to have this space just to work together. But I think that this idea of the neoliberalist universities in which we are living on are explicitly limiting all these opportunities. Yeah.
Yes, it's, I only want to add some comments, no question, comments, as Antonio said. And I think that the interdisciplinary approach and the possibility to co-creating between teachers is now the only possibility for this. But we need time, and we need that the institution, the educational institution, give us this opportunity. For us, in the last 5 or 6 years, it was really difficult. Maria Jose and me spent extra hours trying to connect and trying to find time together with the students. And I think that is one of the most difficulties now in this situation. And of course, I love co-creating. I love collaborative work, because I'm art education teacher. And when I try to teach something, my students always give me other answer that I ask them. So it's a beautiful way to co-create, and it's the way that we work.
Yeah, and I think that it's also a very effective process when we support each other, when we receive this feedback, when they produce things. It's a very, very effective process through all the process of creating this thing and developing critical ideas around all these interdisciplinary projects. But we need time, definitely. I think that we don't have any more comments, because questions we don't have any. Yes, so I think we can just finish. It's late in the afternoon. I think we are all a bit tired. We began in the afternoon with the sun shining in this window, and now it's nearly dinner time for all of us. So I only want to say thank you very much to all the people attending and spending all the afternoon with us, listening to all the different sessions within this day. And I would like to thank you all these excellent international speakers from Finland, United Kingdom, Italy. I think it's brilliant to have the opportunity to listen to you in this specific session. So I'm really, really happy to have this opportunity to collaborate together in this specific seminar. Thank you very much for all your amazing contributions and ideas, and you always push my thinking forward and deeper, and I really appreciate this opportunity of collaboration. Thank you also to Mario and David from the University Complutense of Madrid. They are the people who are helping us with the organization online of this panel. Also, thanks to Sofia Bengoa and Mario, the interpreters who are doing, I swear, an amazing work too. And also thanks to Susana Garrido Sanchez Cano, who has managed all the social media accounts through all these 3 weeks and months before. So I really appreciate that. And Noemi and Shirley, would you like to say something, just to say goodbye and close these amazing 3 sessions about digital health and gender?
Well, I'll just say thanks to everybody, but especially thanks to you, Maria Jose, and thanks for inviting us to be part of this. I've learned loads and love having these discussions with everybody, and obviously thanks to people who have stayed on and attended. But well done, you've done a brilliant job and you should be proud of yourself.
Thank you.
Y yo voy a pasar al castellano un poquito para cerrar la tarde hoy. Muchísimas gracias por estos 3 seminarios. Muchísimas gracias al empuje que dio María José hace ya más de 1 año y medio cuando me dijo vamos a hacer esto, porque es verdad que llevamos juntas mucho tiempo y siempre encontramos momentos para colaborar. La salud digital, la salud nos une, y desde áreas diferentes pues hemos conseguido generar este seminario. Y a la sesión de hoy, a todos los ponentes internacionales que gracias a la labor de María José con el proyecto Una Europa pues ha vinculado y ha empezado, pues yo creo que una tarea que, como vemos y hemos visto en estos 3 seminarios y hoy en la conferencia de hoy, pues hace falta seguir trabajando. Esto es solo un principio y estamos muy felices de haber estado estas tardes aprendiendo y compartiendo. Muchas gracias a todos y ya sabéis que estamos a vuestra disposición.